You have done a version of this. Some night in your life, you stayed up until the sky changed color. You felt strange the next day. Slow, thin, irritable, like you were watching yourself from slightly too far away. Then you slept, and you were fine. The record is 11 days, not 11 hours, 264 hours set by a 17-year-old with no drugs, no training, and a science fair deadline. And the strangest thing about that record is not how long it lasted. It's that nobody can be certain it happened at all, because the real answer to how long a human can stay awake is that you can't. Not the way you think you can. Sleep is not a switch you hold down. It's a tide, and it comes in whether or not you agree. So what actually happens to a mind that refuses? December 1963. A military family moves to San Diego, and their oldest son, Randy Gardner, needs a science fair project. He and his friend Bruce McAllister land on an idea. They will break the world record for staying awake. The record then belonged to a disc jockey in Honolulu at 260 hours. They flipped a coin to decide which of them would do it. Gardner lost. Word spread, and it reached a Stanford sleep researcher named William Dement, who got in a car and drove down to see it for himself. A Navy medic, Lieutenant Commander John Ross, monitored his health. There were no stimulants. Coca-Cola, cold showers, loud music, and two friends whose only job was to keep him upright. Dement's method was basketball and pinball. Movement kept him conscious, stillness did not. If Gardner closed his eyes, he was gone instantly. Here is how a mind comes apart, on a schedule. Day 2, his eyes stopped working properly, not blindness. They could no longer focus on their own, so he gave up reading and watched television instead. Day 3, he turned clumsy and nauseous. He lost the ability to name objects by touch. He could no longer get through a simple tongue twister. Day 4 brought the first hallucination. He looked at a street sign and saw a person standing there. Then he became convinced, briefly and completely, that he was a professional football player. Does that sound like losing your mind? It is closer to losing pieces of it. By the second week, his short-term memory was failing inside ordinary conversation. He would start a sentence and lose the end of it. He was paranoid. He was, by his own account, unbearable to be near. On day 11, reporters asked him the same questions over and over, and the cheerful athletic kid who had been winning every game of pinball snapped at all of them. He described himself decades later as a brat. Then it was finished. 264 hours and 25 minutes. They drove him to a naval hospital, wired his skull to an electroencephalograph, and let him sleep. He slept 14 hours. He woke up groggy. That was all. Which is where this story usually ends. It shouldn't. Because there is a problem with the record itself. You cannot measure sleeplessness by asking someone whether they slept. A microsleep is a lapse into sleep lasting a few seconds, and its defining feature is that the person having it has no idea. Eyes open, body upright, conversation still going, the lights go out and come back on, and nothing in your memory marks the gap. Gardner was watched almost constantly, which is exactly why his case is still cited 60 years later. But nobody trailing a teenager around a bowling alley at 3 a.m. catches every 2-second absence. Sleep researchers now accept that any long deprivation record is, to some degree, unverifiable. He almost certainly slept. He simply never knew it. So what was actually happening in there? In 2011, a team at the University of Wisconsin led by Vladislav Vyazovsky and Giulio Tononi placed fine wires into the brains of rats and kept them awake. They expected the whole brain to grow tired together. It did not. Instead, individual neurons began switching off, not all of them, and not in unison. A cluster in the motor cortex would go dark, while its neighbors kept firing, then come back while a different patch fell quiet somewhere else. The rats were awake, moving around. Their overall brain waves read as awake, but pieces of them were asleep. They called it local sleep, and it was measurable. When neurons in the motor cortex switched off in the split second before a rat reached for a food pellet, its chance of success dropped by about 37%. The longer the animal had been awake, the more often it happened. Tononi's conclusion is the part worth keeping. Those offline neurons, he suggested, are the reason for the lapses in attention. the poor judgment, the mistakes, and the short temper you get when you are underslept and do not even feel especially tired. So when you say a sleepless mind is coming apart, you are not reaching for a metaphor. It is coming apart, in pieces, a few thousand cells at a time, while everything still running insists that you are fine. Which brings us back to the folklore. Open almost any psychology textbook, and you will read that Randy Gardner stayed awake for 11 days and suffered nothing at all. No hallucinations, no paranoia, no lasting harm. That version has been repeated so many times that it hardened into a fact. It is not what the people in the room described while it was happening. Gardner and his friends won first place at the science fair. His record was broken within weeks. In 1986, a man stayed awake for nearly 19 days, and shortly after that, Guinness stopped tracking the category altogether, on the grounds that it was too dangerous to encourage anyone to try. And then, in his 60s, Randy Gardner stopped being able to sleep. He would lie in bed 5 or 6 hours, get 15 minutes, and wake again. It went on for roughly a decade. He called it karmic payback. He was careful to say he did not know whether his teenage experiment caused it, and nobody does. Eventually, some of it came back. About 6 hours a night. You're not going to try this, but there is a slower version, and you may already be running it. In 2003, a team led by Hans van Dongen and David Dingus held people to 6 hours of sleep a night for 2 weeks. By the end, their performance had fallen to roughly the level of someone who had been awake for 2 days straight. Those people rated themselves as only slightly tired. That is the finding that should follow you out of here. Not the 11 days. The fact that the instrument you would use to check whether you are impaired is built from the same tissue that is impaired. Somewhere behind your eyes, small patches are already going dark and coming back, and the part of you that would notice is one of the parts going offline. You have done a version of this. You are doing it tonight.